But we're going to shift gears now, and we're going to talk with my good friend, Bob Pratt. And Bob was the fire marshal in East Lansing, and he has, now after he got through saving people from the fire marshal's job, he's now busy trying to figure out how to save them from drowning. And that's a big task, Bob, in a state that has as much water as we do.
It really is, Bonnie. Drowning is the leading cause of accidental death in children 1 to 4. It's the second leading cause of accidental death in kids under 14.
We just saw a case last week.
Right. It's a huge problem, and it's really unrecognized and doesn't have the resources that it really needs.
Now, I mean, I just can't imagine what it does to a family, because if we know how kids are, you can't let them out of your sight for a moment, literally a moment.
Right, and then on top of that,
can make a difference.
Many times following a drowning situation, people either blame the victim and believe that it's stupidity, or they blame the parents and believe it's somehow neglectful. So on top of all of this grief, we're adding shame and blame, and it really doesn't belong there. You know, coming from the fire service, where we do 5 fire drills every year in every school in the state of Michigan. We do 2 defend in place or lockdown drills every year, every school in the state of Michigan. We do 2 severe weather drills every year, every school in the state of Michigan, and drowning will kill more children than fire, lightning, tornadoes, school shooters combined. Wow. It is a huge problem.
Why don't we seem to recognize that?
Because they happen one at a time. Or you know, 2 at a time, 3 at a time. Rarely is it a big event, and then the whole stigma of drowning, that you know the people are just stupid and they deserve to die, or their parents are neglectful and they don't deserve to have children. When in fact you hit the nail on the head. It can happen to anybody at any time. Those of us that have children recognize that if your child can go and color on the wall with a crayon, if your child can go and cut their own hair or cut the dog's hair, they've been away long enough that they could have drowned in a backyard pool or a backyard pond. And
in very little water.
Very little water, yeah. It only takes a couple inches of water in order for someone to drown in. So it's a very complex problem, but there's a really pretty simple solution to this complex problem, and we call it the Safer 3. It was developed by the Swim for Life Foundation, and basically it's 3 areas that need to be addressed. We need safer swimmers, we need safer water, and we need a safer response. And this goes whether we're talking about your bathtub at home or whether we're talking about the ocean. So with respect to safer swimmers, if we teach children how to swim, and we can start teaching kids water safety at a very young age. You can teach a 4-month-old how to roll over in the water, and you may have seen videos of that on Facebook. It's important to remember that that doesn't protect your child from drowning. That doesn't mean that your child's not going to have a drowning incident. In the toolbox that will make your child safer, putting in children in life jackets. We think that life jackets are only for boating, but if you're taking your child to Lake Michigan or Lake Huron and the water's rough, if you put them in a life jacket, they're going to be much safer. We catalog drownings on the Great Lakes, and there have been almost 400 drownings since 2010 on the 5 Great Lakes. Half of those happened on Lake Michigan, and half of those happened at the southern end of Lake Michigan. We can talk about that in a minute. But of those nearly 400 drownings, we've only had 3, potentially 4 of them wearing life jackets.
Really?
So wearing a life jacket makes you much safer when it comes to water safety. So those are the things that you can do with respect to safer swimmers. With safer water, never leaving your child.
Before you leave safer swimmers, let me ask one thing. I mean, one of the complaints has always been that kids complain about how uncomfortable they are. Has the design of the life jacket gotten better over the years?
It certainly has. We have, it used to be you had the big orange, K-Pog-filled, bulky
things that cut into your crotch. Too.
Exactly. And now they make all kinds of life jackets. My favorite life jacket is an inflatable. It looks like a little waist pack, and it's got a CO2 cartridge, and you wouldn't even know that I had it on if I had it on right now. I also have a kayaking life jacket that's very comfortable, fits very snugly. It's only an inch or so thick. but provides enough flotation for not only myself, but if I needed to rescue somebody else. So yeah, there's lots and lots of new designs of life jackets out there. There's no reason not to wear one.
There's one little thing too that I was concerned about. I just saw a video the other day of a little girl in a pool who had a toy with a little mermaid.
Mermaid tails.
And
right.
It looked like once you put that thing on and jump in the pool, it's very hard to stay upright.
Right. Right.
So we do have some potentially lethal toys out there.
We certainly do, and we see problems every year with inflatable devices that
they're dangerous.
Become uninflated as the child is using them. Or if we're talking about bigger water, if you're on with an inflatable, the wind can take you offshore and become a huge problem. We have drownings every year where someone goes out in an inflatable raft or takes an inflatable toy, even a boogie board or a kayak, and doesn't realize that the strong offshore winds are only going to get stronger the farther they get away from shore. And they can get into real problems that way.
Wow. And you were talking earlier, before we went on air, about how if you do get caught in a cross current, that the challenge is you keep wanting to try to get to shore and head in, where actually you need to go at a right angle.
Right. All of our dangerous currents on the Great Lakes, and we have several. We don't just have rip currents. We also have longshore currents and structural currents. And anytime you're caught in a current, it's very important to understand not to try to fight against the current. We recommend flip, float, and follow. It's kind of like stop, drop, and roll for the aquatic environment.
Flip, float, and follow.
Flip, float, and follow. Flip over onto your back, which allows you to breathe whenever you want to. You don't have to worry about catching your breath or being hit with a wave. Float to see which direction the current is carrying you. Float to calm yourself down, control that panic, realize that there's nothing that's going to pull you under, and then follow a safe course back. And it may be as simple as you falling out of your canoe in the Grand River. Hopefully you have a life jacket on, but if you don't, and even if you do have a life jacket on, roll over onto your back, float, see which direction the current's carrying you, float with your feet downstream, and then follow a safe course of action back to shore in those cases. If you're in the Great Lakes and you're being pulled out by a structural current that runs along one of the piers, again, roll over onto your back. That will help control your panic. Realize that there's nothing that's going to pull you under. Try to signal for help. Float until you see which direction the current is carrying you, and then don't try to swim against it. The current's going to be way too strong.
And I've experienced that panic twice in my life, and I will tell you that there is nothing quite like it. And when it does occur, unfortunately, as we've discovered, you're really not sending the signals that other people expect to see from you.
Right. So drowning doesn't look like we expect drowning looks like.
Not like it is in the movies.
Not at all like it is in the old Baywatch films, which I've studied in great detail. And one of the reasons is the panic itself. When you're panicking, you're breathing very quickly.
Yeah.
And so you're actually exhaling more air than you're inhaling. And so you're becoming much less buoyant. You're actually sinking more, which just exacerbates the problem and leads to more panic, which leads to, unfortunately, a lot of times, the fatality. When really what you need to do is control that panic, relax, take a nice deep breath in, which will inflate your lungs, which will cause you to float even more, which will allow you to control the panic even more. And then, we reverse that downward cycle that happens there. But drowning victims can't wave, because if they simply try to lift their arms up, the weight of their arms is going to push them deeper into the water. So they're unable to wave, and they're unable to yell because they're struggling with every ounce of their energy, and they're gasping for that air. And as a result of the gasping, they're unable to get the air out in an effective means of yelling. So drowning victims will be vertical in the water, straight up and down in the water, because if they're horizontal in the water, they're swimming.
Right.
Their head will be back because they can gain an extra inch or two of breathing space. And the most important thing to look for, if you're a parent or if you're someone at the beach, is a look of terror, a look of abject panic. The eyes may be glazed over, they may just be completely panicked. And a true drowning victim, a person who has no swimming ability, will only stay at the surface of the water for about 15 to 45 seconds.
That's not
So it's
long.
very, very quick. It's not like, the old Baywatch shows where for 2.5 minutes somebody's waving and help, help, help. It simply doesn't happen like that.
Well, I would like to be charitable to my mother. When I was 10 years old, we lived at a lake and we had a drop-off, and I was out there. She was watching me, and I went in and bloop, ended into the drop-off, and I didn't know how to swim. And I went into exactly what you're talking about. And she took a look, and she threw one inner tube about 20 foot on one side, and she threw the other inner tube about 20 foot on the other side. And I kind of learned to swim real fast at that moment.
Sure.
But I'm never too sure she was really going to come for me, so I always was a little nervous about Mom after that.
What she did was she turned your what we call climbing the ladder motion. Lifeguards refer to it as this motion of pushing down on the water. Now, if you're reaching out to grab at the inner tube,
teach you, doesn't it?
You're actually moving that from a horizontal position into a more horizontal motion, and you're actually swimming. So I want to get back. I want to get back to so we talked about safer swimmers. So safer water means if you have a backyard pool, it has to be fenced. It has to have a fence completely around it
with a lock.
With a lock. It has to have self-closing, self-locking gates.
Yes.
If you have an above-ground pool.
What about the sliders to the pool from the house?
Need to make sure everything is completely secured.
I mean, isn't that where a lot of the problems occur?
A lot of the problems occur. Children are very inventive. As fire marshal, we learned that children knew where the matches were in the house. They did a study in Minneapolis where they went to people's houses and asked the children to go on a scavenger hunt, and here, go get me a penny, go get me a pen, go get me a book of matches. And if they were above the refrigerator in a bowl, the children would take and push a chair over there and climb up on the refrigerator and go to it. The same thing happens with the pool. If there's a pool and there's any kind of entrance that the children can get at, they will be able to get at it. They push a lawn chair over to the fence and climb over the fence. If there's a pool ladder that's flipped down, they will find a way to flip that down. So you need to be extra vigilant, especially when there are children around and you have a backyard pool or a backyard pond. They also make alarms for doors, they make alarms for the gates, and they make alarms for the pools themselves. Excellent. So that if there's disruption in the water there.
The surface of the water?
Right, so if you own a backyard pool or a backyard pond and your child is missing, the very first place you want to look is in the water. If they're hiding in the closet, they're hiding underneath the bed, they're going to be fine. But if they're in the water, the clock is ticking and you really need to get to them almost immediately. Wow. And then with a safer response, you need to know CPR. We encourage everybody to learn CPR. If you've been taught CPR, you need to understand that drowning is a different type of emergency. It's not a cardiac emergency. It's a respiratory emergency. So the compression-only CPR is not for a drowning situation. Will not work for a drowning situation.
What, you just bring the water in further?
No, but there's no oxygen in the lungs. So if the heart is stopped, it's stopped not because there's been a heart attack. It's stopped because there hasn't been any oxygen to it. And until you get oxygen into the lungs, you're just pushing around bad blood. You're just pushing around deoxygenated blood, and you're not going to solve the problem. So you really need to get those rescue breaths in. What do you do with, so you do have to give the puffs in the mouth? Absolutely. Because we've been told for the cardiac case that that's for a cardiac case, if the way we portray it is if the big fat guy goes down at the snack shop, push fast and hard on his chest. And you don't have to kiss him. If you pull the person out of the pool, you need to give the kiss of life. You need to get those breaths in there. And then you need to push on the chest. In most cases, if you can pull them out in a short period of time, you're not even going to need to do compressions, because if you can get to them in that first minute or two, their heart's not going to have stopped. It's simply a respiratory emergency. We just need to get them breathing again. Get that water out of there. Right. This is LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Bob Pratt of the Great Lakes Surf Rescue Project. And one of the things that I think in some ways has misled people is that we do have those miracle cases where they call it, I think, isn't it the ringer response, where people will go into the water and they're able to be in cold water for a long period of time and still be rescued. But you're saying mammalian diving reflex? Yes. It's certainly a thing. It certainly has saved some people. It is a protective mechanism, but it's not a panacea. Okay. The cases that have been extremely long period of time are very specific cases with very cold water, and the people survive for part of the time at the surface of the water. However, what that means is that in any case that you attempt to resuscitate someone, you want to go up to an hour. If you pull them out of the water and it's been less than an hour or around an hour, by all means, begin resuscitation, aggressive resuscitation, and try to get them back. But statistically, across the board, if we can get to the person within 2 minutes, we have a 94% chance of survival.
Really, that's
right.
great.
If we go to 10 minutes,
That's a trained person?
Right, correct. That drops down below 14%.
Ooh.
So we really have
Wow.
that 2 to 10 minutes is a really critical time, and then beyond 10 minutes it drops off dramatically. However, we have had those cases where we have had miraculous results up to an hour or so.
Bob, I'd like to know, are there any other policy issues? Because one of the things I'm always concerned about is that when we see the kind of budget cuts that have gone on in the state, does that mean that we've seen cuts in the services available so that professionals like you are available for people? I mean, no one better rely on me. I would not be a big help.
Right. Unfortunately, in the state of Michigan, we have fewer and fewer lifeguarded beaches. When we were children, most of our state parks had trained lifeguards. Most of the municipal parks on the Great Lakes had trained lifeguards. We see fewer and fewer guarded beaches at the Lake Michigan beaches and the Lake Huron beaches, and the same trend is happening on inland lakes. So
that's just budget cuts across the board.
Right, and it's more than budget cuts. Again, it's another very complex issue, because if it were simply about the money, the cost of a single body recovery that lasted 2 or 3 days, which is not unusual at all, could fund a lifeguard service for that particular beach.
So it's
easily.
a policy decision for other reasons?
It is, and again, it's very complex. If I became dictator of the state of Michigan, and
I'd be glad to vote you.
decreed that we have lifeguard on all of our beaches, we don't have the trained staff that could fill all of those positions. So it's important that we work on getting a cadre of trained individuals that can take those positions once we, if we can bring them back to our beaches.
What would be nice too is that, one of the things I think we have had a real lack of in the state is, and many places have had, is summer jobs for young men.
Right.
And those are really the good jobs that a lot of young men used to have. That was a great place to spend the summer and be able to do that. And, everybody was happy to have them there. And
it's a great stepping stone job into other public safety positions.
Yeah.
I went from a lifeguard to the fire service. Many of the people that I worked with out at Grand River Park in Holt, that's now Birchfield Park, became police officers, became firefighters, became paramedics. It's a great job that leads into that, and really life-saving gets in your blood. So it's unfortunate that we don't have more and more.
One last question, Bob, is I do think we see fewer and fewer municipal pools too than we did when we were youngsters. It doesn't seem there are as many places for kids to learn how to swim.
That's a huge problem. The Red Cross did a study recently where over half of the population of the United States cannot do 5 basic skills to save their life in the water. Simply jumping off the side of the pool into water over their head, coming to the surface, treading water and turning around 360 degrees, swimming 25 yards and getting themselves out of the pool. More than half of the population cannot do those skills.
That's awful.
It's unbelievable.
Are schools not doing pools anymore?
We're seeing more and more school pools that are closing. Schools don't teach swimming the way that they used to teach swimming. It used to be almost a mandatory class, and now it's kind of an add-on in a lot of classes. It's extremely unfortunate.
That's really sad.
It really is.
Well, I hope it isn't. And with the drought, it's going to be harder to bring it back. But everybody's going to come here to Michigan where we still have water.
Lots of water.
And Bob's going to be out there with his surfboard, keeping an eye on you, whether he's there being paid or not, because he cares.
Yeah, actually, a lot of our surfers and kayakers and windsurfers save lots and lots of people every year.
They do, don't they?
Yep.
Yeah, and they do that. It's amazing. And I always see you on Facebook offering advice and telling people you do a real education job yourself. Well, thank you for coming in, and I appreciate your annual visit because I end up learning something every single time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's good to see you again.
Always good to see you.